Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. There's a media war being played out before our eyes. The American mainstream media are intent on destroying President Donald Trump. Trump returns the contempt. Is the media making themselves the story? And is this dangerous? Cross-talking Trump versus the media. I'm joined by my guest, Roger Simon in Los Angeles. He is an award-winning novelist and Academy Award-nominated screenwriter, co-founder and CEO emeritus of PJ Media. In Syracuse, we have Roy Gutterman. He is a professor of communications law and journalism at Syracuse University. And in Beirut, we cross to Patrick Henningsen. He is a journalist, writer, and founder of the news website, 21stCenturyWire.com. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Roger, if I can go to you, and I want to ask all three of you the same question here to start off with. Many of Trump's critics say that he diminishes the office of president because of his actions and his words, but one can equally make the argument that the media has diminished journalism by their tsunami of negative news about him every single day, wall to wall, 24/7. Roger, you answer first, please, in Los Angeles.
Well, I mean, journalism was never a high calling. That's one of the great myths.
Okay.
I mean, it's always been diminished. But you know, I think it's being diminished more now because the kind of never Trump mentality of the mainstream media in the United States is so strong that you can't tell the forest from the trees. Of course, Trump does things wrong, but I mean, if Trump scratched his head, it would be wrong to them. So it becomes impossible to know. I mean, the most ludicrous one was when they reported the fact that he had 2 scoops of ice cream at dinner, as if this were something horrible. I mean, that's almost laughable beyond. I mean, that really is Trump derangement syndrome. But you know, I don't know what the other guys think, but I think it's become almost self-defeating. I think the media are the most hated thing in the United States, and there's a reason for it.
Okay, Roy, the same question. Go ahead.
The news is the news, regardless of whether we like it or not, and the press has an obligation to report certain things. Now, ice cream, maybe that's not the most important public issue out there, I'll grant you that. But the other news that comes out as somewhat critical is what it is. Leaking, allegations of secret recordings, or revealing information to diplomats. That's the news. So I'd be hard-pressed to blame the reporters or the media for stories that might not have a necessarily a positive spin on it.
Well, okay, but I mean, all of the examples you just mentioned are allegations, okay? But in this news environment, allegations become facts, and that's the problem with the media, okay? These are assumptions that everything must be true that is alleged, and it's a crime, and it's a conspiracy. Go ahead, Patrick, in Beirut.
Yeah, I mean, you can criticize, there's a lot of things to criticize about Donald Trump as a chief executive, as a president, certainly as a politician. You could argue that he's extremely ill-equipped in the world of politics, and in some of the Machiavellian qualities that one needs to be successful in the world of the swamp of Washington, D.C. Okay, fair enough, but the performance of the media as a whole, especially throughout the election cycle and then in the first few months of this presidency, is even worse than even the worst performance that Donald Trump could do as president. So you have this, it's a really sort of dilapidated environment of politics, of hyper-partisan politics. Yep. It's just gotten worse. We thought it would maybe get a little better. And the media environment they're doubling down on everything that's a losing strategy in terms of media opposition towards this president. But, you know, Trump might not be the ideal vehicle. Yeah. Okay. And even his supporters will admit that for real change or progress or political change in America. But he is proof proof that the establishment who is behind this media machine is just hell-bent on crushing any resistance to the established order. Okay, so I think that's something that we can glean from the first 3 months of the Trump presidency. So where it goes from here, I'm not sure. I don't think he's doing too badly, quite frankly, considering everything that's been thrown at him.
I think all of us can.
I have to
go
agree,
ahead, Roger.
with Patrick.
Go ahead, Roger. Go ahead, please.
I have to agree with Patrick, and I'll add something to it because I covered the campaign and I went all across the country, and it was very interesting that the media people acted like an unelected elite during this whole thing. I observed them. I was with them. They never went to talk to Trump supporters as people. They regarded them as quote-unquote deplorables. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. The media would stand behind their wall, their rope line, and they would sort of observe the Trump supporters like they were some kind of untouchables in India. The whole thing was kind of repellent, frankly. And what the media have become in the United States is a form of unelected elite. And, that stay there through many administrations. Most of these names we've known for 20, 30 years. Yeah. I mean, there should be term limits on the media as well as politicians.
Okay, that's a good point there. Roy, I watch American
Including me.
Okay, well, and maybe me one day too, okay, Roger? Roy, if I can go back to Syracuse here. I mean, a lot of people will say that, if you look at most of mainstream media, most of the traditional press, like the New York Times and the Washington Post, they've just really become political activists. I mean, they have an axe to grind, and they have an ideological view of the world, and Trump is the antithesis of it. So, I mean, they're projecting their own values all of the time. Facts don't really matter very much. And we haven't seen a whole lot of facts about all of the allegations made against Trump and his team. Go ahead, Roy, in Syracuse.
Well, I'd like to bring up a word that Patrick used, and that was opposition. And I think it's really healthy in a democracy and in a power situation to have an active opposition adversarial press. That is part of our history. And I'm sure if you did a heart-to-heart interview with former President Obama or former President Clinton or either of the President Bushes, they would say that they didn't get favorable news coverage either. And that is part of the role of the press, whether you agree with it or not.
Do you think it's comparable? Do you think it's comparable?
I do think it's comparable. I remember watching all the opposition press that Bill Clinton got during his presidency, and even some of the criticism that the press leveled against candidate Hillary Clinton during the campaign. I think the media coverage was pretty rigorous.
Okay, well, Patrick, it seemed to me the mainstream. Okay, hang on, guys, hang on. Patrick, my impression, I'll just give my opinion here. Everyone knows I express my opinion on this program. They treated Obama like the Messiah. I mean, really. I mean, he made mistakes also. There were, the IRS investigation of the Tea Party and people like, I mean, if that happened under Trump, I mean, they'd already be calling for impeachment charges. Heck, they're calling for impeachment even without investigations being completed. Go ahead, Patrick.
No, there was no opposition. The Fourth Estate did not act as a check against the executive branch or Washington, full stop, really, during the whole 8 years of the Obama administration. And like they had performed this role in the past administrations, this opposition to Trump is not real opposition. There's no real critique of any policies or, really evaluating, say, what is the United States' relationship with Russia, for instance? What does this mean? What should it be going forward? Instead, what they're doing is just trying to cajole this president and the White House into what the establishment wants as the relationship with Russia, which is an adversarial one, in order to just maintain the status quo of the arms industry or what we've got going on in the Middle East, for instance, or in Eastern Europe, and then no critique of what is the United States policy with Syria. Instead, they want to cajole the president to launch cruise missiles when they see a YouTube video videos about an alleged chemical weapons attack in Idlib, and then the media is happy. As long as Donald Trump and the White House do what the media wants, which is what the establishment wants, then everything's fine. When he's friendly with Russia, they're against him. When he's against Russia, they love him. When he's against Syria, they love him. When he's friendly with Assad, they hate him.
Well,
it's really
I don't know.
simple.
I don't know.
And
I don't know. I don't know, Patrick.
yeah.
I don't think they'll ever love him. They've never loved him, and they never will love them. Roger, if I can go to you in Los Angeles, and that the primary reason for that is that he is not from their clan, from their tribe, and that's one of the reasons why they hold him in contempt. Okay, he is just he is probably the most unexpected president in the history of the United States, and maybe in our lifetime, and nothing else like this will ever happen again. Go ahead, Roger.
Well, okay, I'll promote myself because I'm on television.
Okay.
In a recent book that I wrote called I Know Best about moral narcissism, I describe how the media in our country has become a form of nomenclatura like the old Soviet nomenclatura. These are groups that are self-protecting and act only in their own interest. And I think that these things are quite similar there. By the way, this is a global issue. It's not unique to the United States. You read the press in every country, and the press has a self-interest. It's not, it's not an America-only issue.
Roy, can I go to you real quick before we go to the break here? Can you want to react to anything that Patrick or Roger just said?
I mean, every business operates in its own self-interest. It's just that the business of the press is really operating in a public service capacity, informing the public and being that check on power, whether it's Republican or Democrat. And it just so happens
Well, that's
the press and media
All right, gentlemen,
are businesses.
Sorry, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We have to go to a hard break, and after our short break, we'll continue our discussion on the media war against Donald Trump. Stay with our team. Okay, I'd like to go back to Patrick. I want to make sure our viewers understand here, I am not advocating for Donald Trump at all. I mean, some of the things he's already done as president is something very upsetting to me. I'm very much against, and it really bothered me that he's flipped on a few issues here. I'm talking about how the media treats him. That's what we're here to do, okay? Patrick, one of the things I think that this hatred for Donald Trump, hatred makes you blind to rationality. You can't be rational when you hate so much here. And I think a lot of this hatred is that the lack of self-examination. The media got the 2016 presidential cycle so terribly wrong, that they can't admit it. They can say, wow, we really blew it. And you know what? We pushed up this guy. We made fun of him. And what we did was we made fun of 62 million people in the process. Probably why they voted for him. And this is the anger that the liberal media has, is because they can't come to terms with their own defeat. It's their fault that Donald Trump is president. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, a show, Iranian show, asked me a couple of months ago. They said, what is going on with this Trump phenomenon? What does it mean to America? And at the time, I wasn't sure how this presidency was going to go. But I said, and I'll repeat what I said, is that Donald Trump himself, just being there as a complete outsider, this was the biggest political upset in modern political history in the United States. But him being there as a sort of a giant obstacle for the establishment will create the conditions possibly hopefully for some fundamental change, because you can see how rigged and how corrupt the system really is, how the deep state is, just because of Donald Trump alone, the term deep state is now being used
commonly
in mainstream.
Yeah. And
before this, commonly, and that's progress in my book in terms of let's have a really good discourse in the United States and in the West about our democracies, about our functioning states. But the problem is, look at the Russiagate situation. That's a complete non-starter from the beginning, and yet they're still trying to push this uphill. And so Dean Heller, I think even a Republican senator, recently said we need a special prosecutor to look into this now. So it's not just a Republican Republican or a Democrat thing. It's definitely an establishment thing. But it's indicative. This Russiagate thing will go down in history as the biggest lemon of all time. And they're still pushing it. The writing's well on the wall, and yet they're still following up with this. So I think the public is going to be fatigued at some point.
I think
and
it already is.
There will be a group of people in America, a chunk of the population, they'll just say, some people will even say, yeah, let's just get rid of him, let's impeach him because we've had enough, we need somebody new, Trump must go. So that could be a likely result down the road in the very near future. But it's still going to be based on what? Impeach him on what basis? It's not going to be about Russia. I can tell you that right now.
Okay, you know, Roger, one of the things, again, watching, you know, particularly, hang on, let me ask you a question, okay? You know, watching MSNBC, CNN, and alike, you know, they're pitching that, you know, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, a threat to institutions. But, you know, it was the media and it was the Democrats that denied Bernie Sanders the primary. And it was Democrats and the media that wanted
Forget Bernie.
Okay, no, let me finish. You know, they're the ones that told the electorals not to continue with the electoral college process. I mean, I can go point after point after point where they are threatening institutions, they are threatening democracy here. Go ahead, Roger in LA. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to go back to what Patrick was saying about Russiagate, because you know what the media is assuming? The media is assuming that Americans have a very short memory, possibly true, but not really, or that we've all had a lobotomy. Because I mean, it wasn't that many years ago that the Democrats were making a big thing with Russia and with the reset button with Sergei Lavrov and all of that. And all of a sudden, that's off the table. Russians are bad, and we're back over again. I mean, the whole Russia thing is a phony because it's being used for partisan politics. It's not. Russia is, in this instance, it's a balloon outside here, and it could be anything. Now, I'm not for Putin's policies, but what the Democrats have done is they've essentially, and the media, because it's the same thing almost, is they've tried to erase history. They've tried to erase very recent history. I mean, it's in that sense, it's kind of like the Politburo. I mean, it's all the same.
You know, Roy, I want to keep some balance right here. You know, we have people claiming that institutions are being threatened, and they may be, okay? You know, Donald Trump may want to fiddle with the press briefings. You know, I think he should be very careful in doing that because the fourth estate should be right there. But at the same time, you have the media that is, there was an op-ed in the New York Times the last few days about how to impeach Trump, and it says we don't even need to finish these investigations. We should just have a vote. I mean, that is destroying the institutions of government. And then, again, 62 million people voted for him. Don't you think that the liberal media should keep that in mind? They still don't seem to be particularly interested in the heartland and what Trump supporters think. We know what newsrooms think all across America, and I would even say elites in Europe. But you know what the people think? And I think this is the danger that is being played out again. Go ahead, Roy.
Again, you know, the facts are the facts, regardless of whether you agree with them. And we've seen with this administration a spinning of facts. Go back to Inauguration Day, and the size of the crowd was the size of the crowd.
Okay.
And suddenly the size of the crowd is something different. And we see this kind of
is that an impeachable offense?
Rejection of factual information.
Well,
I'm not saying that's impeachable. That's hardly impeachable, but
well, that's exactly right. I mean,
it's a credibility question.
Okay. Well, I mean, that is not an impeachable offense. Okay, at least not as I know. I mean, look at the Goldwater rule, Patrick. If I can go to you, 50 years ago, you know, you had some one or at least two psychologists coming out and saying that Barry Goldwater was mentally unfit to become president. As a result, we had the Goldwater rule, where you shouldn't be saying those things in the press unless you've examined the patient. Just Google Trump insane psychology and how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of things you're going to see. And this is coming from the liberal media every single day. Now, again, people are breaking their own rules, and I'm not saying it's only only the Democrats and only the media and not only Donald Trump. But we have to step back and see, just because you don't like this guy, is it really worth turning the apple cart up completely? Is that what we want? Go ahead, Patrick.
No, and you're right. The biggest risk with this sort of never Trump obsession, and again, I like yourself, I'm not advocating for Donald Trump, and I'm one of his biggest critics, especially in the foreign policy department. However, the big damage here is that institutions themselves will be undermined fundamentally, and this sort of co-opting of the media by the establishment, by both establishment figures in both parties. This is down the long term very, very damaging to the American democratic system and sort of the checks and balances system. The media playing the roles of fourth estate, it's almost gone now. It's completely out of the picture. So that's the big risk in this obsession to destroy Trump. They've actually destroyed a lot of the great things about American institutions in the process. It's just a death wish the media have to push all these various conspiracy theories, mostly about Russia. Sergei Lavrov, is the foundation of wisdom now in Washington, and he even said, with all the wars going on in the world and all that you're obsessed about is, we've got a photographer taking a picture or whatever Lavrov's comment was. But again, who's the adult in the room? And when you have to go to Sergei Lavrov, who's visiting, who's brilliant, doing a brilliant job, but he really encapsulated it in his critique with what's going on in Washington. There's a reality check that's desperately in order right now, on especially on the media side and
Patrick,
on whoever considers the opposition.
Roger,
to this president.
You got up the earliest this morning, but you have the most energy. Go ahead, Roger. Go ahead.
Let me just get into one thing with Patrick here, because I think he's right in general. But remember, this is not such a new phenomenon. I can't remember whose quote this was, but I think it's from the 1920s. It's a great one from a New Yorker writer. Freedom of the press belongs to the man who owns one. I mean, remember, these aren't brand new problems. These are things that have been going on and on and on. And there's a yin and yang and an ebb and a flow. And right now we're at a point where the presence of Donald Trump, because as everyone has said on here, he's an interloper, he's not a politician. All of a sudden there's and they all go freak out. But it's not a new problem. This is, and it's inherent in all democracies, and it's inherent in places that were totalitarian, because they kind of locked up the person who owned the press then was the dictator. So
okay, let me go to Roy in Syracuse, because we're rapidly running out of time, gentlemen. Roy, are you worried about institutions being damaged and destroyed through all this partisan fighting? Go ahead, Roy in Syracuse.
Well, we have a process and procedure to deal with everything in government, and I'm confident that our institutions will survive even the Trump administration. We're going to have midterm elections next year, and that might shake things up. Some people in his own party might end up guiding him a little to the job of governance. Governance is tough. Government is complicated. And there are a lot of different issues and a lot of different players.
Donald Trump is learning that. Donald Trump is learning that the hard way. The governance is very, very hard. And I'll have to tell you, gentlemen, I don't think Twitter really helps him all that much when he's trying to govern. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Syracuse, Los Angeles, and in Beirut. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.